One of the things that we're going to discuss and see here is, one question is always this: why did Jesus have so many followers? What was the pizzazz? What was it really? What was it like? Why did, what was he like? Well, I can tell you that, and maybe we've all had people that we've worked with, or went to school with, or friends that again, one of our classes, when you know someone who doesn't have integrity, you don't usually want to be their friends too long. Oh, they're a second or third tier friend. But someone who has integrity, you're almost drawn to them. When you know someone who is honest and pure and wants to do the right thing, we're almost drawn to them. And this goes right back to Jesus. Again, people were drawn to him because he had integrity. And it's something that, again, a lot of times we don't really understand or we don't see. But I wanted to just really kind of start back to where we left off last week, just as a little reminder. And this was that list that I talked about. Again, is it possible to stay out of trouble and do nothing for someone who is having trouble? It is possible to be financially responsible and selfish. I think these are all factual statements, right? And of course, the last two, it's possible to be good without doing any good. It is. I mean, people today would say that. These are, like I said, statements that, as I mentioned, that the leaders in Jesus' day, the Sadducees especially and the Pharisees, these were statements that they lived by. It's possible to be a good person without doing good for another person. Anyone thought of any more about these from last week? Any thoughts come to mind that you had when you seen them? That's fine. No worries. Again, the first century Pharisees and Sadducees would have agreed with these statements fully. But I still, like I said last week, I wonder how much of our society lives by these statements. Because I think there might be a fair amount of people that would say, yeah, I'm a good person. Yeah, but last thing I'm not going to go really help anybody. But as to do with Jesus' time, we see that the Pharisees, these guys were living off of these sort of laws for long before Jesus came. And then Jesus came around. And he changed the whole end game, didn't he? Especially as it's related to truth and specifically as it's related to integrity. Jesus came along and he turned everything upside down. Right? Jesus had come to reverse the order of things, per se. Over and over again, we've heard it from Jesus in his teachings. We'll see it a little bit here today. Especially on the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus says, "You have heard it said, but I say." You have heard it said, but I say. He's taking what they thought was normal and saying, but let me tell you let me turn it around. This is really what we should be doing. And if we boil it all down, Jesus is saying, you are not a good person if you're not willing to do good for another person. That's last statement, the Pharisees and Sadducees, you wonder why they were so upset at Jesus. Geez, I'm a good person, but I'm not going to raise a hand to help people. Why would I do that? That's someone else's job. Roger?
It seems like to start with, Jesus called each person by their name. And at that point, I'm making an assumption that person knew that he knew what was going to happen or about them or something. Something inside let them know.
He very much personalized. Exactly, you're exactly right. Yeah, Mike.
I had a business partner once who was a devout atheist, but he believed in the existence of Jesus Christ, the man, and he said the reason, in his estimation, the reason Jesus was so popular was because he told a story that resonated with people, and like Roger said, he developed a relationship with individuals rather than just being a man for the masses.
Yeah, or figure or whatever.
Yeah.
Again, a lot of the leaders of the Pharisees and so forth, they were people knew who they were, but they had no, they really couldn't approach him, or it wasn't something that they were the set on the heel type thing.
Yeah, they knew that what Jesus was saying resonated with them, that it was true, nobody was doing good for them.
Right.
They were poor and they were They were orphans and widows and unattended to. So Jesus was able to say the things that made sense.
Right. And again, we'll see how that really upset the ruling party there, because they weren't used to this pure honesty and this what this stuff's called integrity. So again, as we finish up our class lesson today on integrity, one more time, give us this statement as it's related to integrity and simplifying what integrity really means. And that is that integrity, as we remember from Proverbs 11:3, we've used this almost every week, the integrity of the upright will guide them. Remember, sit up straight. Look forward. See what's out there. Look at beyond. But the crookedness of the treacherous will destroy them. And history has proved that. The Bible has proved that. And we'll see maybe a little bit more here today. And also just want to remind us that, you remember, we going back to the first couple of classes when we talked about the ought to, and we know that we don't always do what we ought to do, right? But we certainly expect others to do what they ought to do, right? Again, our actions may not be consistent with our reactions. Actually, our actions may not be consistent with our reaction, but they are very consistent with what other points, with the other action, what our reaction is to other people. What our action points is to an ought to, that we hold ourselves and others accountable to. An ought to that we didn't create, if we remember, but we know that it's there. We can't seem to shake it. We know what we ought to do. And then I pointed out what we don't do. What we ought to do always costs us or costs someone around us. If we don't do what we ought to do, there's always going to be someone that's going to have a negative impact on that, right? A lack of personal integrity negatively impacts some other people, as we talked about in the very first. Right. I guess we've seen a very good example of that. Remember that consequences or the tension that's created when we have a breach of integrity is always transferred. Just remember, like the pillars, and we have a bad pillar in a building. No matter what that tension is, it's always transferred to other people around it. And it always transfers to those around us. And as we discussed in the story of Jacob and Esau, we see what that tension did, right? It's just the way it is in life. A breach of integrity is always going to cause tension around us. We've seen it in our own families. When maybe one of our children, whatever, has a problem, at school or whatever, we see it comes home and it just reverberates through the family. And if one child isn't getting attention, he seems to cause more tension with the rest of the family. It's just the way that it is, and in life, and as we've seen in this whole study. And then also I want us to remember one of the key verses. Again, is our Proverbs 11:3. In fact, Andy always says he wanted people to memorize this. Now, hopefully, if this is something that has stuck with you, because Proverbs 11:3 just explains it exactly perfect. The integrity of the upright will guide them, but the crookedness of the treacherous will destroy them. Now, I want also to look at one of the most famous passages in the Scripture that we're going to look at today. And with regards to the statement that I went over at the very first, remember that the leaders of the day did not appreciate Jesus' teachings at all, because they seemed to go against what the leaders were actually teaching, and also what they were exhibiting, not just what they were teaching, but a lot of times just, again, what they showed, right, and how they interpreted the law. You might say that Jesus' ministry was not focused on him, obviously, but was focused on his message, whereas the Pharisees and the Sadducees focused more on themselves and their personal being and their status. That's what their focus was on, and they didn't like that. This just went against. Come on, how come you're calling yourself this and you're not acting like it? It's odd, but we're going to see in this first passage that the leaders actually made a startling yet accurate observation about Jesus. But as we'll see, they're not trying to give him a compliment. They're actually trying to set him up, because again, they're tired of him. They're like, this guy is just he's getting all of the attention. All the crowds are following him. And we just don't like that. And he's saying things that we don't like. But what Jesus is about to reveal is in his actions and his reactions is what real world integrity looks like and how real world integrity behaves. And it's one of our best examples of how we should behave and how we should respond into situations that we'll inevitably all encounter in our lives. So to set this up, Jesus had just taught a series of parables, and we're going to be in Matthew 20, starting in 21, but Matthew 22 mostly. Jesus has just taught a series of parables to the people that were now following him. His crowds are growing more and more. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees, of course, are there. They're listening, and they're realizing that the punchline of just about every one of these single parables is about them. Who's going to like that? They're kind of fed up. But what's interesting, again, we talk about integrity and what you're going to do, and this was interesting because they said in Matthew 21:46, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they looked for a way to arrest him, but they were afraid of the crowd because the people held that he was a prophet. What were they afraid of? The people? Yet they're the ones that are trying to show that they have the power? It's kind of amazing. So what they decided was the only way that they were going to get the crowd away from Jesus was to get him to say something that would cause the crowd to abandon him, right? So they could isolate him from the crowd, and then they could have him arrested. Because last thing they wanted to do is to go in and try to have him arrested the crowd, because then cause a fuss, and the people they didn't want that. They wanted everyone to stay in their line. They didn't want to cause any problems. They wanted to make sure everything was the way it needed to be. So actually, we're going to start reading in Matthew 22:15. It's going to be our first section that we're going to be reading in. So if you want to turn there. So it goes like this. There are these two groups, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They're going to get together, and they're going to come up with. They've decided they're going to. They've all sat around and decided we've just had enough. So they most likely got together. They said, even though these two groups maybe didn't. It's interesting because we'll see that there's some differences between these two groups, and we haven't really looked too much of that. It's studied too much of that. But they get together and they want to come up with these three series of questions that they've decided they're going to take turns. They're trying to trap Jesus and get him to respond and have him stumble with the answers, so that the crowd just goes, well, hold it, this guy really isn't as good, and so they're going to have their chance to go in and get him arrested. So the Pharisees go in first with the first question here, and Jesus knows exactly who these Pharisees are. They've been in the crowd. I mean, they stand out. They're dressed in a certain way. You can't miss them. They want to make sure that they're noticed anyway. This isn't something that we know that Jesus knows exactly what's going to be going on. There's no way they're going to trick him, but they're going to try to trick him. So let's turn to Matthew 22:15 and 16, and this is where it talks about paying taxes to Caesar. Then we're going to see that the Pharisees went out and they laid plans to trap him in his words, and they sent their disciples along with the Herodians in 15, right? Then the Pharisees went out and they laid plans to trap him in his words. Then they sent out their disciples. So again, they sent out their minions. They knew they didn't want to do it because he would know that the stem is coming to us. So again, trying to trick him. And he also sent along some Herodians. Now, who were the Herodians? Anybody know who they were? Yeah, Herod. Yeah, they were the guys going through town making sure that everything was the way. Again, if there was a problem, they'd go back and report it. Say here's what's going on. Here's a problem. So they sent them in, obviously, because they wanted to make sure that with the answer that we're going to see here, these guys really thought this through. So they decided to get some of their disciples and some of the Herodians to approach Jesus. So so he didn't think it was the Pharisees doing it, of course. This group of people, this is the group of people who, oddly enough, made these accurate statements about Jesus. And you wonder if it's because they heard the crowd, or they themselves as disciples were kind of leaning towards Jesus and hearing what's going on and coming up with this. Or I very much doubted that the Pharisees told him to say the statement. I really, it's even Andy said he's not sure where this kind of came from. But starting in 22:16, they said, "Teacher," they said, "we know that you are a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth." Now, do you think the Pharisees would have said, go in and tell him this? I think they knew that he was a man of integrity. I think the crowd knew that he was a man of integrity. These disciples, these people here knew he was a man of integrity because of everything he was doing. He wasn't trying anything special. He was doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. So it is obvious that Jesus was known as a man of integrity and that he was teaching the way to God in accordance with the truth. And then they go on to say, you aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are. Does this not fit exactly with what we've been talking about, what integrity is? Do you really care about what your coworker is saying? No. Did Jesus care about what the Pharisees and the Sadducees said about him? Did he say, well, geez, I guess if they're saying that, I might as well, maybe I'll go put on a special robe and I'll do this and I'll try to look the part a little bit more. Did he do that? No. What he did, as it said there, you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. That's pure, unadulterated integrity. Do what you're supposed to do the way God wants you to do it, and in truth. Roger.
Truth has no agenda.
You're right. Right. And we've seen, again, it's amazing just how Jesus was just, he was just pure truth. That's all he was. He wasn't out to put himself, and again, a lot of times people thought, well, if you're the Messiah, how come you're not, you're supposed to be on this level and you're not. You're just down here with the people. But yet it made sense it made so much sense that so many people were following him. These people, he wasn't paying people to come and follow him, but this wasn't a thing where you want to look, hey, what, we want all the holy people to come. No, they were coming because why? Because they could tell that he was a man of integrity by what he did, how he acted, what he was teaching, and that he was teaching the truth. So it goes on and it says, so of course Jesus is going, yeah, this is great, appreciate it. Yeah, I am a man of integrity. And all of a sudden he says, so then tell us, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Now, this is the Pharisees right here. This is what they want him to say right here. So tell us, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay to the tax to Caesar or not? So, the Pharisees are looking for a yes or no answer here, aren't they? They're trying to say, look, we don't want him to get into any, it's a yes or no answer. So, if he says no, what's the outcome? Now, remember who they went with the disciples. Who was there? The Herodians. Okay. So if he says, no, you shouldn't pay taxes, what are the Herodians going to do? They're going to report it back, And they would report it back, and he would have been called for treason. He would have been executed. Real simple. If he says yes, what do the Pharisees have in plan there? The Pharisees would denounce him to the people as disloyal to their nation. Oh, well, how could this guy tell them what we should do? So, that's they're making it simple. Jesus has to say yes or no. We're just asking them a yes or no question here. But again, Jesus is not who they think they are. Again, it goes on to read in 18 through 22. But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, obviously, again, nothing's going to pass him. You hypocrites, you're trying to trap me. He just kind of brings it out right there. You're trying to trap me. So he said, show me the coin to use for paying the tax. And they brought him a denarius. And he asked them, whose image is this? And whose inscription? Well, Caesar's, of course, they replied. Well, then he said to them, give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God. When they heard this, they were amazed, so they left and they went away. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? It wasn't the answers that they wanted, so they couldn't go, what? Oh, okay, how do we do this? We got to go back, I guess, report to the Pharisees. We didn't know how to report, how to handle that, because Jesus knew what they were doing. He replied in a way of integrity. He was just speaking the truth, wasn't he? Yeah. So again, that's the Pharisees' first turn. Next, we're going to see the Sadducees, right? Now, does anyone know something that's different between the Pharisees and the Sadducees? One of the main things?
to angels and demons. The Sadducees were not. The Pharisees believed that you could practice away from the temple. The Sadducees were invested in the temple. They were very well-connected people. They typically had connections in the Roman government. So the actual institution of the temple was where they got their wealth. So they were a little more secular, if I could, in that their approach, because that's how they got their well-being. So it was more self-interest than interest in what the people wanted.
Right. So what's also interesting is we got these two groups we always hear about, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They were both leaders, but they needed to work together, but yet they had differences that they didn't, they obviously caused tension between the two as well.
I think Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection.
You're exactly right. There's the key right there. So what's interesting, because we're going to talk about, this next section here talks about the Sadducees are going to talk about the resurrection. Well, they didn't believe in the resurrection, right? So it's almost like, again, this is almost leads, as Andy said, it kind of leads to where the two had probably got together and said, look, let's, I don't like you and you don't like me, but we really don't like this guy. Let's work together to see if we can maybe, come up with a plan. Because it's interesting, just some of the other origins and where it all came from the Sadducees. And Mark, you're correct on a lot of these. Only accepted these guys also accepted the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. They rejected oral traditions. Again, they were into that reading. They ran the temple, as it says, what their practices were. They were affluent lifestyle. They followed the Greek traditions. They did receive some Roman support too, which was quite interesting. Now, compared to the Pharisees, is again, you can see that they believed in bodily resurrection and life after death, but the Sadducees did not. And these were more middle-class merchants, number about 6,000. They, like the last one, they accepted the Romans as a necessary evil as long as they, were allowed to practice their beliefs. So there's a lot of differences between here that I didn't realize when I started looking at this. But, these two were both the ruling class at the time. So anyway, now we see that it's the Sadducees' turn. The Sadducees, again, as we explained, did not believe in resurrection. So they were trying to trap Jesus in thinking that maybe they did believe, in resurrection. So we read in 22, starting in 23 through 28. It says, that same day the Sadducees who were there, who say that there is no resurrection, came to him with a question. Teacher, they said, Moses told us that if a man dies without having children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up his offspring for him. Now, there were 7 brothers among us. The first one married, and he died, and since he had no children, left his wife to his other brother. The same thing happened to his second, and the third brother, right down to the 7th. Finally, the woman died. Now then, at the resurrection, which they didn't believe in, whose wife will she be of the 7, since all of them were married to her? Again, Jesus kind of like just chuckling, like, what's going on here, It's, little side note here. Does anyone know what's currently, or at least what the Guinness World Record number of marriages a woman has ever had? 23 marriages by a woman named Linda Wolf. And what's also interesting is that now, how about the man? The man who's had the most marriages. It was all because when I looked this up, it didn't say it here, but then I looked up later, and it was, excuse me? Solomon? Maybe legal marriages, I don't know. But his name was Glenn Wolfe, and he'd been married. He married her, was one of his wives, but he'd been married 29 times. So that's quite a bit. We're just talking in the 7s here, but anyway. But then we see Jesus reply, right? So Jesus replied, you are in error because you don't even know the Scriptures or the power of God. Well, you don't know the Scriptures. That's all these guys did, That's all they did was read the Scriptures, But he's calling them out right here. You're in error because you don't even know the Scriptures or the power of God. First of all, at the resurrection, people will neither marry or be given into marriage. They'll be like the angels in heaven. But about the resurrection of the dead, have you not even read what God said to you? Again, stab. You think you know all of the Scriptures front and back. He said, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And when the crowd heard this, They were astonished at his teachings. They were not expecting him to say this at all. But he's a man of integrity, and he comes across in a way of integrity. So interesting. Any thoughts about that?
When I think about integrity, for me, sometimes it's going about doing the right thing, but not necessarily having to tell you why I'm doing it. You know what I mean? But Jesus, even if they were doing something wrong, I'm not necessarily going to challenge you. I'm just going to do what I think is right, and da 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 da. If you tell me, I'll ask you. But Jesus made a point of letting people know that why he was doing what he was doing. And so he not only acted, he also said something that was truth. And where I tend to be more at work, maybe quieter about it, maybe not standing up as much, or maybe doing it more individually, he kind of stood out. And I thought that was interesting. I mean, he obviously does, he's Jesus. He doesn't back down. But when I think about integrity, sometimes maybe I need to maybe be a little more verbal as well as
Actions?
as along with my actions.
Right. Give that back to Roger.
Verse 32, this just impresses me. He's in the middle of explaining here. He says, I am the God of Abraham. That could have a period to it.
Uh-huh. You're right. Yeah. Well, he says, yeah, we're exactly. He says, yeah, but you haven't heard what God says, but true. You're exactly right. But again, these guys go in trying to do something that doesn't happen. It isn't by just chance. Oh, just God, he's lucky. Lucky when Jesus on that one. Lucky when Jesus on the second one. Third time we're going to get you here because we got three times that we're going to do it. But so now the Pharisees go back again. Okay, you guys tried it. Okay. And Mark Swan isn't here, but it's interesting because I asked Mark Swan. When you have a real tough lawyer case, when you send in the best, right? You get the top of the cream of your what do they call them? Practice. They usually have a whole bunch of different lawyers, but they kind of same thing. You got your entry levels, your mid levels, and you got the high level guys that they are the guys that know what they're doing. And this is kind of what they're doing. They're saying, okay, we're going to get the top of the guys here, and the best and brightest lawyers, and he's going to deliver the question or questions. It's interesting because what it says here, starting in 22:34-40. So again, hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together again. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And this is almost, everyone knows this. These guys are all raised in Sunday school or whatever it was. They could all, and as Jesus replies, they're probably all repeating this along with him. Real simple, Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest command. Again, it was a no-brainer, And some suppose there may have been a second question, to try to trap Jesus. Again, this is kind of that build-up. It's kind of like, well, okay, real nice. Well, what's the greatest command? And it most likely could have been a second question. But before this smart lawyer could have asked a second question, Jesus, of course, said, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commands. It doesn't say, but I can bet they all walked away exactly the same thing going, what in the world? What's this he just said? Why did he say that? I want to see where I am here, 22:37. Again, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest command. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commands. This is one of those most powerful statements that we've ever seen in the Bible, right? And this is, in my, at least in my humble opinion, these two are equal and inseparable in these commands. You can't have one without the other. Both are equally important. Now, they would have said just the first one, that's the most important thing, because if you love God, then you love his law, and you're going to follow his law, and you're going to do exactly what his law says. And that's the important thing, is just to follow the law. And then Jesus throws the second part at it. Mike, it's coming around there.
What he quoted there was the second half of the Shema, which is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God, and you will love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and strength." So you're right, they knew that that was basic to everyone. Everyone who was a Jew knew that.
Yeah.
They didn't necessarily focus on the second command, but the Pharisees focused on the thou shalt nots. They had plenty of ancillary laws that kept them. I've heard 365 or something in that order that would keep you from getting close to the thou shalt nots in the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, in fact, Andy put his in because again they were so focused on the law, and that was love the Lord your God, that they actually built laws around the Torah so that you couldn't even get to the Torah. That's how continued to build laws. That was what they thought loving the Lord was to do his law, to make more laws so that people couldn't break his laws to try to keep the laws. That's what they were focused on. Imagine how they would have felt when they heard the second one. Love your neighbor as yourself. What? That's not my job. My job is to love God and the law. The law is what's important. And this is one of the most important points in Jesus' ministry, of course. And his integrity was clear to those all around him. Let's go back to this. Ought to isn't just about you. It's about the folks around you. And you wonder why Jesus had those crowds. Because he did what he ought to, and it brought in the folks around him, because he knew it was important to the folks around him. And this dual command is designed to bring us back around to where we always need to be when we seem to get lost in the world. Always bring us back around. As Jesus said, he's here to turn things around. It's where the Apostle Paul, who had once considered himself a Hebrew among Hebrews, a Pharisee among Pharisees. Remember, he was up there with those guys, right? And we all know the atrocities that he committed while being zealous in his quest to persecute the Christians. As we all know, on the road to Damascus, he had a big change in his life. And that pointed him in the right direction. It turned him around, and he understood fully what Jesus came to do, what he came to teach. And as I said earlier, he came to reverse the order of things. And Paul also confirmed and reiterated what should be considered the most powerful and meaningful and useful instructions the Bible has ever had to offer. And back in after Corinthians 5:14 and 15, we see Paul say, "For the entire law is fulfilled keeping this one command." One command. The entire law. Love your neighbor as yourself. Because as we're seeing now, Mike said, if you bite and devour each other, watch out or you will be destroyed by each other. That's what we're seeing a lot going on in our world today. Even in our own country, we see people, all we're doing is fighting amongst each other. Especially in leadership. More than we've ever seen in my lifetime. Is it just amazing? Any thoughts? Some may say, and for the first century leaders, would have said, Paul, again, you left out the most important one here. Boy, it's love your Lord your God with all your heart and your soul. But Paul would have said, no, not really, because this is how you know if you love the Lord your God, is if you're loving your neighbor as yourself, then you're already doing number one. I always come, and Steve can attest to this. I mean, my fallback is always L1 and L2. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and love. But again, then you realize, if you do number one, if you do number two, you're always doing number one. You can't do one without the other. You can do number one, which we see in history. That's what they were really good at doing that, or professing that they were good at doing that, loving God only. But that's not what he wanted. He wants us to love, and Jesus, of course, continues on with that. It's not enough to keep the law. It's not enough to keep the commandments. It's not enough to be good, as we said earlier, without doing good to others. It's not enough to be good for goodness sake. Remember the Christmas thing, be good for goodness sake. Oh, It's not good enough to be good for goodness sake, is it? And when Jesus, near the end of his ministry, continued to remind his disciples, and I'm sure over and over again, we already see this in a few places, but I'm sure it was like me, I was Jesus would have been continually repeating this statement. And of course, we see it in John 13:34, 35. Jesus says, "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." We've heard this thousands and thousands of times, right? We're preaching to the choir here. Everyone knows this. But do we really understand how important this is? Do we understand how simple it is? When you can take your Bible and you see how thick it is and how many, just all the different things you can learn in there. And I've always, and Leanne can attest to this, I've always said, God is not complicated. He never has been, and he never will be. If you find it being complicated, like the laws, like making extra laws to make laws to make around, that's just all here and there. And it was interesting because when the Sadducees was trying to say, well, if this happened and married this guy and this married this guy and this married, it doesn't matter. The devil's in the details. All of this, that doesn't matter. What matters is this: learn to love one another as I have loved you. How much Jesus loved those people, we don't really have an understanding, but to have the size of crowds that he had, there was something there that was amazing. In a very basic and simple way that the people weren't used to. It was his integrity that he showed without showing it, without even needing to show it. It was there. We are drawn to integrity. We are drawn to people of integrity. We ourselves can be people of integrity. Roger.
I don't see it here. It says that, it does say that they were astonished at his teaching. In other places it says that he taught as one having authority, and they could understand. Everybody could see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly right. If we want to find out how much integrity you have, practice loving one another, and you'll quickly see the results. That simple. Doing what is right, as we've said, no matter what the cost, or not caring what the cost is. Practicing being selfless and not letting selfishness guide us, but let integrity guide us, as 11:3 says. Remember, anything we gain by sacrificing our integrity, I've said this before, anything we gain can or will be most likely taken away. We can go as far back and see, are there any more Pharisees or Sadducees? Did their integrity bring them forward? No such things. They're gone. What they gained by sacrificing their integrity is now gone. They're gone. Their integrity's gone. And by the way, we didn't really finish this, but the two other leaders in Daniel that were the three, and then they were the ones that got everyone together and decided they were going to throw them in the lion's den. And as Susan, I think you maybe mentioned this. What happened to the two other leaders in Daniel after Daniel came out of the lion's den? What happened to them? The two other leaders, the guys that were, not only that, but their whole family. Everything, they just threw them, again, just did a little thing there. But by the way, those guys that didn't have integrity, They were just thrown into the lion's den, and it even said before they even hit the ground, their bones were tore apart. Before they hit the ground. That's how hungry those lions were, obviously, right? So, what they gained by sacrificing their integrity is now gone forevermore, even their lineage. Remember that. And what did Esau gain by sacrificing his integrity? Remember? What did he gain? What did he gain? A bowl of soup. A bowl of soup. And then he ate that, and that was gone, and his integrity was gone. Boom. Right? So what he gained by sacrificing his integrity was also gone. And what happened? What happened after that? As we said, their lineage was just amazing. How much problems they had. So if we consider ourselves to be Jesus followers, let it be said of us as it was said of our Savior. This is kind of interesting because insert your name here. We can do that. Roger, they said, we know that you are a person of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to what they say. Fill in your name. Hopefully, that's what you want people to say about you, is that. Wouldn't that be a great statement that we could use? The last thing, again, just with another little reminder here. Our responsibility in life is to obey God and leave all the consequences to Him. Not an easy thing to do, but if we do it, our integrity will be pure. We'll learn from it. And I myself I've learned more from this than you guys considerably. And again, I'm truly going to work on being a man of integrity because it'll only go farther in life, way past my life. Me not having to worry more about myself and more about what God wants me to do and the consequences that God will handle, which I am 100% sure that He can handle much better than I can. So, any closing statements anyone has? Any thoughts? Well, hopefully you got something out of this class. Again, I just want to thank Andy Stanley for his material he put together. Again, if you want to see the true thing, you can get online and actually watch his and it's even more powerful. But very, very important. So let's go ahead and have a word of prayer. Most wonderful and gracious God, again, we just want to thank you for this time we've been able to join in looking at integrity and how it affects our lives, how it affected the lives of those in the past, all the examples you've given us in your word. And help us, dear Father, as we leave here to learn to be more people of integrity, to hopefully understand the importance of it, to hopefully understand the simplicity of your word and how we need to love one another as Jesus loved us. And so many things will fall into play. We thank you for this day, for the beauty that surrounds us, for the health that we have, for all of the many blessings that we know come from you, for you are the giver of all good and wonderful blessings. And we ask that you continue to be with us today. Help your Spirit to lead us through the rest of this service. Help us to be open to your word and to the fellowship and the goodness that's going to be here today. Again, we just thank you and love you and thank you so much for all that you have done, and especially through our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.